All right, today we're going to take a walk through an entire vocal effects chain. Now, almost everything we're going to cover today, I have separate videos on that go more in depth, so I'm going to leave a lot of links. So if you want to dive deeper, there'll be a bunch of extra resources. But the point of this video today is to just give you an idea of a vocal effects chain structure and why things are dialed in the way they are and in what order. And of course, every vocal performance and every mix is different, so there's probably no point to try to copy and replicate any of this exactly. The point is to show you the what and the why of the effects chain so you can take something away from this and hopefully help you build your own a little better. So let's get on into this effects chain. So first things first, let's take a listen to the vocal by itself. Let's hear the same thing in the mix. Yep, and easy to hear that the vocal is pretty buried in the mix. We're pretty much only getting the mids and low mids cutting through. Needs a lot of work, needs compression, needs clarity, all the usual things. And the channel strip is right here in yellow, and that's the vocal up here in yellow. And real quick, I just want to show you the vocal dry soloed out and show you the LUFS meter. So right around -13.5 thereabouts on average, -14 at the end there. And with the effects chain turned on. And it's right about the same on the LUFS, but you can hear the difference. The vocal is way, way clearer and more balanced. It's very bright, so it cuts through the mix really nice. I just wanted to show you that so you know that things are level matched, because the difference with the chain on and off is pretty dramatic. So now let's dive into the chain here. You'll see that I have 10 inserts going. Now, each one of these is doing tiny little things. They're all affecting the vocal incrementally in small ways. And if you're worried when you see an effects chain this long that it's going to be a real drag on the CPU, one of the videos I'll link to is on CPU management, because there are ways to deal with stuff like this if your computer's struggling. And the first one in the effects chain is this Brit Pre. It's a little preamp that gives a nice analog saturation. So take a listen to the vocal with the entire effects chain on, but no preamp. And then with the preamp on. Yeah, super subtle, but that little bit of an analog saturation to start off the effects chain is really helpful. And then the second thing is the subtractive EQ. And we have a nice low shelf rolling off here. We do have a little bit of the low mids at the muddy range taken out. That's 3.5 dB at 300. And the mic was picking up some noise up here at 10K. This was the only hotspot that was aggravating to the ears, and I took out 5 dB at 10K at a really narrow Q. Let me boost it real high so you can hear that. Yeah, so that little bit of extra noise at 10K was probably just from the microphone. And now the boosts that are in here, I typically don't recommend doing early on in the effects chain. I typically save boosting for after compression. My normal recommendation is subtractive EQ first, then compression, and then EQ that involves boosting or contouring the sound to fit it into the mix. But in this case, because this vocal was not hard to compress, I did go ahead and do a few little boosts here, and there's a little mid-side action going on here, and this is at 1K, and it's only 1 dB at a 1 octave boost, only in the mid channel. And then this is a 2 octave boost at the vocal clarity range of about 3.2K at 2.5 dB. And then a little bit of a high air shelf up here at just under 13K, another 3.5 dB. So take a listen again with that EQ turned off. And on. Yeah, very nice. And then next in the chain came the de-esser. And then we get into the next two inserts, which are the classic vocal compression technique of the 1176 and the LA2A. And again, I will link to a whole video on this vocal compression technique. But the idea behind the FET compressor, the 1176, is to just catch the peaks. And I also want to point out that before I even started, I did do clip gain balancing in this vocal performance. It's still a little dynamic, which I like, but it's a lot less dynamic than it was before the clip gain. And I have a video on that as well. But you definitely want to use clip gain to take the edge off of your compressor's job for you, especially on a lead vocal. So the 1176 here, I set the high pass frequency at about 300, and I have a ratio of 8:1, a pretty fast attack and a fast release. And now watch the needle on the right. We're looking for the gain reduction here only in the loudest parts. Very little movement. Now if I go to this other section, and there we go. That little couple dB of gain reduction at the peaks is what we're looking for in the 1176 on the vocal. Any really loud notes that jump out, it's going to catch it and bring it down like a limiter, which is awesome. But it's not there to do the gain reduction on the entire performance, just on the peaks. And then we follow that up with the LA2A, the opto compressor. And a real steady 6 dB of gain reduction. And the opto has that really nice slow release. And you can see there that the gain reduction is all in between 5-7 dB on this meter here. So we're getting a nice smooth compression with the LA2A. And it's important to point out here, I'm not trying to get all of the compression I want from that technique. The 1176 catches the peaks and the LA2A gives us a nice smooth opto compression, but that's not the end of the compression story. Now, the next insert is saturation. And saturation is really, really important, especially for a kind of thin vocal like this. You'll see down here that I have the saturation set to the low mid-range. Instead of trying to color this vocal with just EQ, we're trying to color it by adding in harmonics. And bypassed. So you can hear that when it's bypassed, it's a little brittle and it doesn't have the body and the weight in the mids and low mids. Listen again, bypassed. And back on. Yeah, very nice. And let's listen to the more dynamic part again with it on. Yeah, it's adding a little bit of crunch there. Bypassed. Back on. Yeah, it's subtle, but it's filling it out, and it's adding harmonic overtone content into the performance in a way that you just can't get without saturation. And after that plugin, the seventh one is more saturation, but this is an exciter. It's a bunch of even harmonics, not too many odd harmonics, because the odd can get pretty harsh. I don't have it cranked, I have it just under 50%, and the range I have down to 2K. So this is adding high-end harmonics from 2K up. And I have it set at 2K because that's a little below the vocal clarity region. This vocal's clarity region was at about 3.5K. So this is adding in more saturation, but only from 2K and up. Take a listen. Bypassed. And on. And that one is a lot less subtle. That's quite noticeable. And those are the high-end harmonics that really help this cut through the mix without boosting too much high-end EQ. And I will also link to a video I have about exciters and high-end saturation called the Sparkle Bus, which if you're interested in this, you should totally check out. So one more time, bypassed. Back on. Yeah, very, very helpful to have those harmonics added in. And then now we get to more saturation. This is a simple tape saturation, very subtly. It's not cranked up. Bypassed. Turned on. Nice. So we have a total of 3 different saturators going on here, and 4 if you include the little bit that the original preamp is putting out. And honestly, 5 if you include the little bit of harmonics that are added by the FET compressor, because this is very colorful. So we're adding in a lot of warm analog feel and saturation and overtones into the vocal, which is filling it out. So super important. Now, next in the effects chain comes upwards compression. This little free version of OTT is pretty aggressive, and it can be kind of hard to work with. It might not be the one that you want to go for a vocal, because it can be a little finicky and heavy-handed. But the point here is to get some upward compression going for a couple reasons. Instead of just over compressing from the top down and using makeup gain, it's very helpful to blend in some parallel upwards compression to make not only the quieter notes of the vocal boosted, but also all of those harmonics that we added in with the saturation. This is going to boost those subtle low volume harmonics up into the signal. And that's why OTT comes later on in the effects chain after all of the saturation. You'll see here that I have only a little bit of downward compression going. I have it at 50%, but I have the upward at about 175%. The depth knob here is only at 30%. Take a listen. And with it on. So right away you can hear that all of the saturation we've added is being boosted up into the signal, because it gets a lot brighter and denser. And remember, saturation also adds compression. And now if I bring the mix on with this bypassed, take a listen. You can hear how the end of the line trails away, and it's a little harder to hear. One more time. And with it on. So yeah, blending in some parallel upwards compression is about getting it to cut through and making the most of the saturation that we added. And I should point out that yes, there's 3 saturators going here, but none of them are cranked up too high, because that can make your sound pretty ugly and start to distort. That's why I recommend using saturators very modestly and use multiple if need be, and then OTT boosts all of that subtle saturation up. So very helpful. And the last thing in the effects chain is some dynamic EQ. And this is a free dynamic EQ. I have a whole video on this one, but this is where we bring back the low end to give a little bass and weight to the vocal. We're bringing that back at the end so it's not affecting any of the compressors. For this vocalist, I have it set at 175, and this is a really healthy boost down here, just above the bass guitar and just below the fundamental of the snare. And then up here, just below 700 hertz, we're just adding a tiny bit of gentle extra compression to the mids, but not a lot. We definitely don't want to over compress the mids in a vocal, but you do need to keep them steady. So there's no booster cut going on here in the mids, just a hair bit of extra compression. And now this really big boost up here is 3.5 dB, just above the vocal clarity range at 3.7 K, so right in that neighborhood there. I have a ratio of 3:1 here, and the threshold turned down quite a bit. So this is where we're boosting more clarity range and making sure it stays under control so it doesn't get harsh. And the top note here, this is just above 17K, and it's just 2 more dB boost up here at the air region. Even though we added all those harmonics, we're just boosting that range a little bit more here. And of course, this is a decision you make in the context of the mix. You don't just do this automatically unless it's necessary. But let's take a look at the dynamic EQ in action here. Yeah, you can really hear the difference. This is adding in a lot of extra compression and tone control. Yeah, so that is the last step in this effects chain. There's 10 inserts there that are mostly doing really subtle things. Here's the effects chain bypassed. And this vocal and this mix is by no means finished, but it's at least far enough along for me to show the idea behind this effects chain. Just to recap, the first one was the preamp, and then some subtractive EQ with a little bit of mid-side boosting, and then the de-esser, and then the classic vocal compression combo of the 1176 FET, followed by the LA2A Opto. And then we get into saturation, the first one targeted at the low mids, and then the exciter targeted at the high frequencies, and then some tape saturation done very gently. And then we get into the upward compression, so we don't have to over compress with a downwards compressor and use too much makeup gain. And it also brings up all of the harmonics that we added with the saturation. And then the last thing was the dynamic EQ, which is kind of the last step for bringing back some of the low end. And then we used the high mid region boost where the clarity is, added a little more compression to the mid range, and gave it a little more air on top. So that was the extent of the effects chain that should translate to pretty much any project and any genre. You'll just have to tweak these accordingly. But the overall recipe here is pretty sound and it's pretty versatile. But there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to leave a lot of links under this video so you can dive into any of these topics deeper here. But let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one.